organization to be working with, and really honored to have them involved in the summit this year. The roundtable now will focus really on powering the clean energy transition and look at innovation on the front lines. So I guess without any real further ado, I'd like to pass over to Cassie Flynn at the UNDP to introduce herself, the roundtable, and the audience as well. Cassie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Owen, and it is such a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited about this conversation because we're talking a lot today about what it means to be innovative in the real world. We throw this word around, innovation, a lot, and in particular when it comes to energy, we throw about innovative solutions, innovative approaches, and ways that we can sort of give the impression of this leapfrog forward when it comes to the energy transition. And while those words may sort of help us to describe what is going on right now, there's immense progress that's happening on the front lines, and a lot of progress that's not really being shown in a day-to-day way. And this is where I'm really excited about this conversation. We're going to hear really fantastic stories from the Gambia, from Iraq, from Kenya, from Uruguay, and places that may not be on the front page of all the newspapers, but they should be, because what's happening there is really setting the tone for what innovation is really looking like when it comes to the energy challenge. And with the energy challenge, we know that we have to do a lot in a very short amount of time. We have to achieve things at a scale and speed that we haven't seen before in the scope of history. And this is where the work on the front lines really comes into play. We hear a lot of big numbers when it comes to energy. 780 million people around the world don't have access to energy. And that affects every part of people's lives, not just what it means to be at home and not being able to have that access to energy, but also what it means for hospitals, what it means for schools, what it means for communities to not yet have the ability to rely on sustainable, clean, and solid energy systems that many places around the world are striving to achieve. And so with these stories, I hope that you are as inspired as I am. It's constantly a moment to be thinking about how we can continually improve, how we can help unlock a lot of the challenges that we're seeing when it comes to the energy transition, and that innovation really means rolling up your sleeves. It means tackling things in real time. It means being able to be flexible and agile and being able to have the networks and partnerships and support that really can make this possible to change lives. When we talk about the energy crisis, you know, this unlocks all sorts of other aspects to this that can help improve and achieve the sustainable development goals all around the world. So I'm really happy today to be a part of this conversation and really very much looking forward to it. And Owen, back over to you.
Thank you, Cassie. Likewise, super excited for the discussion and keen to get into kind of our first conversation and hear our first story, really. So to introduce Naomi Kioi to the discussion, Ms. Kioi, you know, Africa, as we know, holds many small countries and many of those vulnerable. So I can only imagine some of the struggles and needs of those communities within the continent. So interested to know kind of a bit more around the work that you're doing and what inspired you and your team to come up with an innovative technology to help power these communities.
So thank you, Owen. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about. Having been born and brought up in Africa, I have seen this firsthand. I have traveled across different communities across Africa and seen how people live without energy. And this is actually one of the fuels and what has driven my passion. So I would say our inspiration was driven by people who lack energy access. And as mentioned earlier by Cassie, we have approximately about 780 million people without reliable energy access globally. And taking the African context, the pandemic has put this progress into reverse, with the number of those lacking electricity in Africa rising to more than 590 people in 2020, an increase of 13 million people or 2% from the last year, according to a report by World Energy Outlook. And out of this, we also need to highlight some crucial communities and public sector services which rely on this energy to run day-to-day activities safely and efficiently. So just to name a few are like maternity hospitals, livestock farms, rural households, and many other businesses. So at Greenlight, where I work, to be able to power these communities effectively, we focus on 3 key competencies to help address energy access problems. So the first is product. We innovate and develop products that cater to the basic. I got muted. So yeah, I was saying that we focus on 3 basic needs. One of them is product. So those are key competencies. So where we innovate and develop products that cater to the basic needs like lighting, communication, entertainment, and cooling. Number 2 is distribution, where we focus on last mile distribution to reach remote, rural, and far to reach customers. We do this either directly through our direct to consumer channels, which also include online channels, or by developing unique customer-centric distribution channels through partnerships with various industries like telecommunications, banks, MFIs, agricultural companies. We work with so many partners to actually be able to deliver energy access. Then the third key competency that is very important is financing. So keeping in mind that rural off-grid communities may not always be able to pay upfront for energy for a long sustained period. So you realize that affordable products and affordable payment plans over a period of time helps them gain access to energy without much stress on their monthly budget. And this is largely driven by the pay-as-you-go technology that has been instrumental in bridging the energy gap in Africa. So bearing all this in mind, we need to constantly engage with off-grid communities to gain the right consumer insights to create fit-to-purpose sustainable solutions for energy access. And we gain these consumer insights by constant engagement in communities through various touch points like agents, community leaders, our own retail stores, people's families, sales teams, and many others. So on one end, you have innovative products. On the other end, you have innovative technology. And what drives these two together, I would say, to have energy access is to be able to bridge the gap with innovation that actually brings the synergy that we need. And I'd also mention some examples of products born out of these engagements, like home systems, televisions, cook stoves, hair clippers, and so many more. Thank you.
No, thank you, and a really important and really interesting project, it seems. So interested to know a little bit more around the strategy and how it works. It sounds like we're kind of looking at small distributed costs rather than kind of big centralized power factories that we're normally accustomed to. So do you see this working in other countries, other off-grid communities, and how were local communities engaged in the planning and implementation of this mode of electrification?
So what I would say from my experience, a successful model in one country can be replicated to another, but what is key is local adaptations. So let me give an example. We introduced pay-as-you-go technology in East Africa a couple of years back, and it has actually transformed the pace of energy access in East Africa. Today, nearly 1 million households, roughly 10% of Kenya's population, is powered by Greenlight, Sun King, Easy Buy Solar Home Solution. So based on the success of PayGo offering in East Africa, so in 2017, Greenlight expanded energy financing business models to Nigeria, home to the largest off-grid and under-electrified populations in Africa. And this was implemented successfully with a different model. We use the cash collection-based model, since Nigeria is a very cash-driven market. And then you'll also realize that we don't do this alone. So we need various players in the ecosystem. So an example is a partnership between UNDP Trine and the Islamic Bank, aimed at quantifying, I would say, the impacts the company is having on SDGs and climate action. The analysis already indicates that green light is having an impact on 12 out of 17 SDGs. And green light is not just providing energy, it also has numerous development outcomes. This includes extending hours for children to read after the sun goes down and they come home from school, as well as having increased income for women who are able to run their businesses for longer, and also improving the health of people because of avoidance of kerosene emissions, amongst others. So the funding, Trine, and other institution organizations provide us help expand our reach to touch even more lives and accomplish our mission of powering lives through energy access. So I would say, so as you can see, working and reaching one SDG majorly impacts the success of other sustainable goals as well. So energy is central to nearly every other major challenge and opportunity the world faces. So this includes poverty eradication, gender equality, adaptation to climate change, food security, health, education, jobs, amongst others.
Sure. No, and really an interesting start. So thank you, Naomi. I'm sure we'll come back to some of those topics. Would like to bring in Susan Sami Al-Barnett now. It's exciting to hear about some of these new technologies and how they're improving the lives of off-grid communities. I've learned that you do play an important role. You have played an important role in transforming the energy sector in Iraq by catalyzing the solar energy industry in particular. So keen to hear more about that. Susan, over to you.
Thank you so much, Owen. Although Iraq is one of the oil countries and oil is the main cheapest sources for power generation, the country is still suffering from high deficiency in covering the energy demand due to the deteriorated infrastructures as a result of the military conflicts and terrorist acts, which already prevented the country from achieving its plan to transition towards the renewable energies. Therefore, the National Climate Policy, which is the NDC, stressed on the importance of security and peace inside the country. The bright side of this story, I think, is that Iraq is a country with high solar resources, along with a low degree of cloud cover, making solar energy an alternative solution and a predictable energy source with relatively low fluctuation in off-grid power generation. Also, in addition, the photovoltaic generation could be the most suitable solution to feed electricity grid during peak load periods and to ensure the reliable supply of electricity. So promoting PV in Iraq is an opportunity to create a new energy market and to promote the integration of a private sector in the solar power fields. That's why the UNDP, in cooperation with the Iraqi government, implemented the GEF funded a project through 5 years duration entitled Catalyzing the Use of Solar Photovoltaic Energy inside the country in Iraq. Within this project, a range of policy support activities were conducted to address the existing barriers, especially governmental subsidies for fossil fuel and electric power, lack of infrastructures and legislative framework and awareness to promote solar power, enhance the national expertise for installation, operation and maintenance to reduce the lack of technical capacity. All these are outcomes from this project, and there is a lot of outcomes from another projects also implemented by the government in collaboration with the UNDP and in partnership with other organizations, international organizations, where they seek to increase the ambition of the national climate change policy, which includes a very wide spectrum of activities under the clean energy transition in all the national sectors, whether in mitigation, adaptation, or even in the co-benefits area, to be part of strengthening the national economy and diversifying its resources through shifting towards using LPGs or hybrid cars, investing in flare gas, or even use the hydrogen technology in the manufacturing sector.
Sure. Sure.
Actually, using a new environmental sound technology will reduce the dependency on the fossil fuel, which is the main source for anthropogenic GHGs emission. And this will support the shift towards cleaner energy generation and greater reliance on clean electric power in a wide range of sectors like transportation, manufacturing, agriculture. This will enable the government from making this technology available to the citizen in affordable prices. Thank you, Owen. Over to you.
No, thank you. It's really fascinating, and if I'm honest, it sounds like Iraq's energy sector and the national climate plan is much more developed than I personally imagined. Now, interested to know, and again, of course, of the time, so briefly, if possible, what led to this success, and what are the priorities set by the Iraqi government to lead in the world of this transformation?
Thank you for the question. I think that the presence of the political will, as it will support the citizen ownership to be the most important success factor in this field through promoting the enforcement of laws and instructions. I think in Iraq, the government provides various incentives to encourage private investment in the renewable energy sectors. Companies investing in renewable energy equipments have been exempted from both operational and income taxes to make this equipment and its spare parts available in affordable prices. Iraq also initiated a bidding process to private sector and a private investor interested in investing in solar or wind projects, and allowed also direct proposal if they apply or comply with the bid terms and conditions. In 2018, Iraqi government signed contracts to produce 1,000 megawatts, which will be increased to be about 2,000 megawatts of solar PV plants by 2025. Also, the government has recently declared economic decisions taken by the cabinet, which came in line with the Iraqis' accession to the Paris Agreement, to open investing doors to produce 12,000 megawatts from renewable energies. I think all these will be key priority for the Iraqi government, and also protecting the national economy from deterioration by diversifying its resources and transforming into a green and resilient economy. Also integrating the SDG through achieves all the plans and related strategies to enable the country from adapting the effects of the climate change and mitigation the national anthropogenic GHGs emission as stated in its NDC document. I think empowering the energy sector through transmitting towards renewable energy to fulfill the electricity demands, enhance the health and well-being of the Iraqi citizens, create green jobs opportunities, and reduce the poverty, especially among youth, women, and children, as part of human rights and achieving the sustainable development goals. This will be a very important key priority for the government of Iraq in the coming years. And this will be, I think, one of the outcomes of the Iraqi national NDC that will be submitted to the UNFCCC.
Sure. Sure. Thank you very much, Susan. And again, we'll I'm sure come back to some of those conversations. Would like to though bring in Mr. Gregory Patterson-Jones at this point. I mean, it is truly inspiring to hear about some of these great initiatives and fast transformation happening within vulnerable communities around the world. I've heard that you know, in the Gambia, for instance, there are the vulnerability has been overcome by guarantee-based private sector-driven investment models for the energy transition. So, Mr. Patterson, can you tell us a little more around this model that your team have developed and how you can how a guarantee issue through a development partner such as the UN can reduce the risk for an IPP?
Sure. So just a brief introduction. I run a consultancy out of sunny Scotland, which works with development partners in trying to create financial structures which overcome the challenges that you've got in these sorts of markets. So what we did in the Gambia was find an ensemble of measures to make sure that we could build 2 solar power plants in the country in the cheapest way possible and allow the local utility to sell energy at the cheapest rate to its clients. And in order to do that, you obviously want to make the cost of generation as low as possible. Now, in order to make the cost of generation as low as possible, you want to have the people who build it as cheaply as possible. And in order for them to do that, you've got to do 2 things. You've got to make the process competitive. And secondly, you've got to make sure that the funding sources are as cheap as possible. And in order to make the funding sources as cheap as possible, you've got to have access to debt, because debt is cheaper than equity. Now, in order to invite debt into a project in a country where the state utility is not creditworthy, the country is non-investment grade, it's a very small country in the west of Africa, surrounded by Senegal, it's got various political, social, and economic challenges, it's very, very difficult to do. So if you want to invite a project developer to build a solar plant and sell that electricity to the local utility network, you've got to do so in a way that takes a lot of those risks away for the developer. But you've also got to put things in place that will allow them to borrow money into that project at the cheapest price possible. So when a private sector developer develops a generation plant, they base the economic rationale on the sale of energy to the utility. And that's governed by a thing called a PPA, a power purchase agreement. And that agreement sets out the terms in which you sell the energy. Now, the only revenue for that business over a long period, and these are 20-year assets, things that are generating revenue for 20 years or so, is the revenue you're getting for the electricity you're selling to the utility. So if the utility doesn't pay you, you go bust. And if the utility delays its payment, you go bust. And if you have any risks of not being paid, of course, nobody's going to lend you money. So how do you get debt into a project where the person paying you is not creditworthy and the general risk environment is very, very high? The only way you do that is provide some sort of guarantee. Now, the way energy is sold has a very, very standard, internationally at least, a standard way of drafting legal agreements. Now, you first got to institute that level of standardization in the legal agreement where you're selling the energy to the state utility. So that's one of the first measures we did. We got an international law firm to create a standardized set of legal documentation that would govern what would happen when payments don't happen. Secondly, then, we looked at what are the risks for non-payment, and then we defined 2 sorts of risks for the project. The first risk was that there's late payment. In other words, the cash that you're expecting to service your debt, because you've got to pay every quarter on the debt that you've borrowed for the project, doesn't get paid, or it gets paid late, which is quite common in the public sector in this part of Africa, specifically NAWEC not being a highly creditworthy or cash flush organization. So that's the first thing we put in, which was what we call a liquidity support facility. The second thing was, what if this is ongoing? What if there's a real problem? What if the state utility goes bust? What if things happen in the country which don't allow the utility to pay? What if all sorts of other political and economic risk? What happens then? Now, in terms of the power purchase agreement, you have a thing called a termination event, which says, if the project is terminated, and it's not the responsibility of the people running it or the sponsor, the owner of that asset, of that power plant, then you have a payment which would be made by the utility, a termination payment. But if that utility who's supposed to make that payment is not creditworthy or doesn't pay, what do you do? So we provided a second guarantee based on the termination payment, which said in the case of a termination event, as defined in this legal agreement, the PPA, the UNCDF would use its guarantee then to pay out against this termination event. So then we took those two legal risks. We had those covered. We created a legal structure around that. We used the money we had raised from the NAMA facility, which is supported by the German government, the British government, and the Danish government, and used those funds then to put it in an escrow account to cash back that guarantee. And that is the structure we then use to enter into a competitive bidding process for international developers then to come into the Gambia and offer the best price possible for building these generation plants.
Okay. No, fascinating, and another amazing example. Excuse me, potentially for assuming, but a similar question really that we posed to Naomi earlier. If this kind of success, this innovation can happen in the Gambia, do you think this can also happen across other African countries to help accelerate clean energy, affordable energy in the region? Are there other, success factors in addition to, financial de-risking that should be taken into consideration when developing private sector-driven energy transition programs in the region?
Yeah, so I mean, I do a lot of work on a lot of transactions across Africa, and we've implemented guarantees elsewhere, and we've implemented them at platform level for funds which are actually either guaranteeing individual transactions or a portfolio of transactions. So we've done them for banks, portfolios of lending to off-grid businesses. But we've also looked at the other things which make these things work. And one of the things you need to do is have some sort of technical assistance facility, especially when you're dealing with a small, not well-resourced utility, which requires a full understanding of the international standards that you have when you negotiate these types of project finance agreements. So there is some training required. There's some upskilling required if you are using that standard of legal agreement, or at least that standard of legal structure. The other thing that's important to do is run the process with a high level of communication to all parties. So when you run an open procurement, you've got to be very clear what you're offering to the developers, what you're offering to the different arms of government, who's responsible for what. So it really has to be managed as a program. It's not like a single transaction. What you're doing here is you're setting up capability, understanding, and everything across the ecosystem. So within the government departments that are responsible, the land department, the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Environment, the state utility, UNDP, the guarantor provider, the debt providers, the commercial banks, the DFIs that are providing the debt, and so forth.
Brilliant. No, that's super interesting. And again, I'd like to come back to some of these points. And I should mention at this point, before we introduce our final speaker, that there will be a Q&A element coming up very soon. So those listening in, please do pop your questions into the chat. And then when we finish with this last really interesting story we have coming, we can get to some of those. So, starting to sense really the importance and relevance as well of collective ownership between community, private sector, and other actors for innovation and transformation. Mr. Ariel Álvarez, I'd like to bring you in here, and can you talk to us more around kind of that strong role of government in connecting the dots using policy instruments, like the UNDP, GEF projects that you manage, and yeah, keen to hear more about the e-mobility project in particular, and which are the main actors you are implementing, particularly related to innovative financing schemes.
Okay, thank you very much. As you know, I'm the project manager of a GEF project administered by UNDP here in Uruguay, that is working in the energy and environmental ministry, local ministries. So I would like to make a little introduction of Uruguay on this respect, because as was explained by the representative of Iraq, we are in a very important moment of transition of energy. Uruguay is facing that, and we are already producing 98% of the energy consumed electricity with renewable energy. There has been a huge transformation, And now 70% of CO2, 70% of petrol consumed in Uruguay is related to transportation. That's why all the local government, all the institutions, and even companies are looking to transportation. Uruguay wanted to make one of the best frames to develop this. So this is what we are doing with incentives of all types. As I said before, we have local electricity produced here and economic based on renewable on top of that. And we are also working in normative regulations, everything to support this, let's call it new technology. I say let's call it because it's very old, but the technology of electricity used for transportation. We are also working in capacitation, obviously. But what I wanted to say is that this must only be like the excuse to make a huge transformation in Uruguay. This need to go to this new technology must create, as it was said, also green jobs, new opportunities. We need to look to gender aspect. We need to look to social aspect. We need to put again the person on top and not the car, so that mobility creates opportunities. Mobility creates more democratic access to all what can give a town, the village, the country. So these are the aspects where I would like to appoint and to say why it's so important that public institution and also private need to work together to make this energy transformation, this environmental more important transformation, but to look it also as a social transformation.
Absolutely. Fascinating. And I think a great way to wrap up. It's a perfect example of how clean energy transformation models are being moved into kind of a national scale. I guess my last question before we open it to the floor would be, how much of a political will do you personally think is needed to make this kind of transformation happen?
Okay, so yes, answering a bit more what you were asking me in the first one related to this one. This policy, energy policy, was started by the government in 2008. In this moment, we said, okay, we are burning a lot of petrol. Let's try to look other type of energy. And as I said, when you are producing it locally and when you see that it can be economically to produce it locally with renewable energy, you are making all what I say, but also you are transforming your country independent in energy. What's important for this? And more for a country that is not a petrol producer. So the institution get together to make this policy. 2008, in 2009, all the policy to how you say that to answer to climate change was also established in Uruguay. And from this, all this what I was saying in the first question started, and now it's getting accelerated. We create last year a subsidy to buy green buses, again, to make social in the first place, but also this transformation. We are incentiving, making a lot of incentives for all that. UNDP is like, put everything together through our project to look exactly where do we need to put the accents, so this transformation gets start and accelerate. And the second part of the answer will be, we are also calling the private sectors. We are making agreements with banks so that they create green financing. We are talking with different companies. So we create something is very innovative. The project is letting for free electric cars, not cars, but the little trucks, no? So that they can try them for 1 month and they will see. And after that, we gave them and say, this is what you consume, this is what it costs you, if you had used the equivalent in petrol, you would you will pay this, and normally it's like 10 times plus. So we are also informing that this technology today in Uruguay is even more economic. And that's why it's so important financing, as it was said also, because you know the to buy it is more expensive, but then in operation is more economic. So as I said, you need a country policy, you need this institution get together, but on top of that, or with that, in between that, you need also the private sector, because it will be the one that dynamics all this policy.
Sure. No, thank you. A brilliant set of experiences and stories. So thank you all for sharing those with us. As I say, we would like to open it up to some of the folk involved today to ask some questions around what they've heard. We have a question here that has come in from Alex Loureiro. Alex, if you don't mind, kind of putting your microphone on and maybe asking your question to the group, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, happy to. Can you hear me?
You're a little quiet, Alex.
I have issues with Zoom. Can you hear me okay?
If not, then maybe I can ask the question for Alex. Exploration for resources is critical for development of oil and gas, but also numerous renewable energy sources, safely fitting wind farms, local minerals, etc. So the question asked the panel, how do you see the role of exploration evolving as we transition, and how do we ensure access for exploration is safe and sustainable in these communities?
I can take that if you like.
Let's go for it.
Yeah, so it's a fairly standard practice in any development process for a renewable project, pretty much anywhere in the world, including most African countries. In order for the development to fulfill the requirements of getting to the stage where you can start negotiating agreements for offtake and getting your licensing, that it's got to go through a standardized impact assessment, which is compliance with local laws. And most of those laws require certain work to be done in, let's say, a wind project, for example, to make sure that it's not in the flight path, that there aren't other claims, indigenous people's claims to the land, that bird flight isn't interrupted, that there are other environmental issues which haven't been addressed. And all of those are then formalized in a document which is called either the environmental impact assessment or environmental and social impact assessment. And that's a standardized document which happens in the development of most renewable projects. In geothermal, it's slightly more complicated because you are actually drilling. It's very like oil and gas. And the issue is actually less with environmental compliance and more with the fact that there's a high risk of not finding a geothermal activity which will allow you to form a project. So really there it's more of a financial issue. How do you fund exploration rather than making sure you comply with the environmental components of exploration? But largely this is not considered amongst the market as an issue because there's a standardized process for making sure you comply with those. On top of that, pretty much every development finance institution in the world complies with a set of standard performance targets, and IFC performance standards is a good example. Those are a set of minimum standards which are needed to be fulfilled in order for the project to actually get any funding. Over.
Please do, Ariel.
Can I get some also comment a part of this? I think it's a great question. I understood that the question was more, it was even related to what petrol companies can do in this in Africa and in other countries. My understanding is that the transformation we are talking about here will happen very few years, hopefully, or in some extra years. So Middle East, Africa, petrol producers today need to focus on that. They have today resources that are letting the world to move. This is important, but technology is changing. You have today economic resources. You have financing resources. What are you going to do with this? You will continue using them for some things, or you will start saying, as I put the example of Uruguay. Uruguay before imported petrol to produce electricity. Today is absolutely energy independent. We are producing our own electricity, and it's even more cheaper than before. So this is what the countries need to understand. These transformations is a very huge opportunity, and you need to do it today, that you have the resources to do this based on a very old energy that will leave us hopefully in the coming years. And I think it's very important to understand that you need to tackle this to make the transformations in every country on energy, and with that, in all these social things that are needed to be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Ariel. There's a second question that's come in, actually maybe well suited to Naomi and Susan, actually. It asks about how we can kind of continue to grow and encourage such community kind of led projects. The question specifically asks, what can we do to push governments to do more within their individual states? So Susan, perhaps I'll come to you first and then Naomi, or vice versa.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you for the question. I think it is very important. There is a need to accelerate innovation for the technology. This is very important to explore the ways for renewable energies and implement projects, innovative projects. Also, human resources development is very important. Reduction of transmission, integrated least cost planning. This is so important for citizens to have the new technologies in affordable prices. Also, we need to establish an independent regulatory agency to control all these issues. System of digitization, including dissemination of smart meters or trending for new technologies like wind, bioenergy. All of these things should be controlled in good instruments of legal instruments to enhance the ability of citizens to have it or to buy it as and use it for community. Thank you. I think this is my idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Naomi, I'll come to you.
Okay, so what I think the government can do. So number one is reduction of barriers to entry for most organizations that are actually involved in businesses in off-grid communities. You realize in most African countries, it's difficult to operate and it's difficult to set up. So when there's reduction of these barriers to entry, you can be able to actually create solutions and reach the really poor and energy poor people in those markets. Another that I'd say is creating a conducive market for local assembly and manufacturing to make it affordable for the people who don't have energy, because most of them live at the bottom of the pyramid and they live under $2 a day. So for them to be able to afford these solutions, there needs to be a conducive market for it to be able to be accessible. And usually the best, maybe you'd say like local manufacturing, because it's going to be cheaper and create more jobs in the market and actually foster a lot of green energy jobs in the different countries. I'd also talk about creating projects together with the private sector, which will able to drive energy access for the countries, because most of them, you realize like the energy access is maybe under like 50%, like it's really low. So what would be great is when if the government works together with the private sector and development partners to actually be able to foster and drive this energy access, because people need to know that they can trust these solutions that are being created. And one of them is the government actually being in the forefront and driving these conversations and helping different players to be able to create energy access for people who need it, because electricity is coming, but as we wait for it, we need solutions to actually, which are clean energy, to actually be able to give people some decency and humanity with energy access. So that's what I'm saying.
Thank you, Naomi. We could continue discussing these things, I'm sure, for a long time, but just being cautious of the time, I think would be good to pass back over to Cassie to reflect on some of the conversations we've had today, and to share some closing thoughts as well for the roundtable. Cassie, over to you.
Thanks, Owen, and thanks so much to everyone for these examples. I feel quite inspired by them because it really delves into the ins and the outs of how we make this transition happen. That it's not just a matter of snapping our fingers, and and Ariel, as you were reminding us from the experience with Uruguay, this takes years of work. This takes commitment, high-level commitment, Susan, as you were talking about, with political will, and connecting this to the Paris Agreement and NDCs. Naomi, what you were speaking about in terms of the energy development nexus and making sure that there are low barriers to entry to help all people and all communities be able to help drive this transition from where they are at. If they are living on less than $2 a day, how can they be involved in this? And what are the ways that we as a global community can help to make this happen? And certainly, Gregor, what you were talking about in terms of the risks and looking at these financial, political, and social risks that go into sort of these deals, and making sure that we can help to alleviate these risks, to help again lower these barriers of entry, so that countries like the Gambia can help make this transition come to life based on the resources and the capacities that are there. I'm really, I could ask a million questions. I took many notes throughout all of these interventions, because I think this is all something that we need to be able to learn from. That as we talk about this challenge and achieving this energy transition, it's these stories that are going to help drive this, and it's these stories and these lessons and these types of experiences that help all of us to imagine what is possible at this very critical time. And so certainly at the United Nations Development Program, we are one of the largest supporters on climate action around the world. And certainly we are rolling up our sleeves along with our partners at the UN. There is something called the high-level dialogue on energy that's coming in September. This is the first summit on energy that has happened at the UN in 40 years. And I think it goes to show that now is the moment. Now is the moment where we can take these lessons and take these experiences and help to amplify them and help to share them so that other countries can learn from this. And I encourage everyone to get involved in this. Even right now, there's a high-level ministerial dialogue that's happening, and these dialogues are going to help feed into the summit in September. And this is where I think everyone can really get involved. There's something called energy compacts that you can make a commitment toward, and certainly start joining the conversation. And Gregor, Ariel, Naomi, Susan, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share with us these successes and this work that has been ongoing. And I hope to be learning more from you and helping to be able to share these stories so that other countries where on the surface it may be like, oh, this energy transformation seems like a very difficult challenge, that they can learn from you and they can help to drive this transition in an equitable and inclusive way. So thank you so much. It's such a pleasure. And Owen, back over to you.
Thank you as well, Cassie. Echo all of those thoughts and echo our thanks to the panelists and to the UNDP for being involved. Those tuning in now live, and also those now watching this recording, appreciate you joining us and do hope to see you again soon. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.